In your position as a Mercedes sim driver, it'd be good just to get your thoughts on what's going on at Mercedes at the moment. A disappointing weekend for them. We had George finished in P5 and Lewis finishing in P10. What's the root of all the problems at Mercedes at the moment, do you think?
Well, I really think, I haven't been in the sim since before the Bahrain test, the general test, when we were out there covering with Sky Sports F1. And I could see on track already, it didn't quite look like the car that I know in the simulator. So that was already ringing a few alarm bells for me while I was out there. I am back in this week, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of work to do. I'm looking forward to it, really. I'm looking forward to getting stuck in and use all my experience throughout the years of not just being with that team, but all the different cars I've driven and raced in my career. Look, if I knew the answers, then they wouldn't be finishing where they are at the moment. It was very surprising to see Lewis not make it through Q1, I must say.
Oh, it was amazing. It begged belief. Yeah. It was incredible to see. I was stat on that. It wasn't since 2009 at the British Grand Prix on pure pace that he hadn't gone through to Q1.
Yeah. It was a big shock for everybody, myself included, and I guess for Lewis as well. And it's not what we're accustomed to. It's not what the team are accustomed to after winning 8 championships on the bounce. I think there's a long way to go, but I think the main point of it is that they just basically can't run the cars ride height where they want to. I see lots of other cars out there that can, say the Red Bull, for example. It can scrape along the ground as it goes down the straight, sparks flying off of it from underneath. They cannot get that car physically any lower to the ground due to the sparks coming off the ground. It's on the plank on the floor of the car. Whereas you don't really see that with the Mercedes or the Ferrari for that matter, and you see a lot more bouncing going on the car. And I think the Mercedes really ideally wants to run where the Red Bull is, but every time they try and go there, the porpoising, the bouncing gets unbelievably detrimental to the comfort in the car and also the speed. And the problem with Jeddah is that because it is high speed, and that's where the phenomenon starts. I think anything over 230 kilometers an hour, this porpoising begins. Some of the corners in Jeddah are that fast. So it's not just happening on the straight line, it's happening within the corner as well. And then the car becomes a bit of a bucking bronco and you can't hang on to the thing. So I think that's really the problem for them, is that they have this potential in the car. They know it can be much quicker, but they can't run it where they want to. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating problem. And as one of the engineers from the team said to me, it's just an engineering problem. We'll figure it out.
It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Let's hear what Lewis had to say after a disappointing race.
Not much has changed really since the last race. So it's only been a few days. So what I know is that today I couldn't keep up with the Haas at the end. That whatever the power they have, they came flying, slingshotting past me when I overtook Magnussen earlier on in the race. So we've got a lot of work to do for sure. But I know I've got a great team, and we'll just keep our heads down and try to improve.
Understandably, pretty disappointed. Naomi, where can Mercedes go from here?
I actually wanted to ask Ant, because there's 2 important things you spoke about, Ant, that I'd like to pick up on and get your perspective on. Firstly, there's obviously, as you said, a lot of work that you're going to do this week in the sim and in the weeks to come. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that work looks like and how your role can help them, develop the car? And then secondly, let's talk a little bit more about, the big disparity between Lewis and George's qualifying and why that might be. I know the cars, roll out of the factory identical, but then obviously there's a lot of things that each individual driver can build on when it comes to setup. So do you think it's a driving style issue that potentially, this particular car is suiting George better, or is Lewis just not getting on top of the setup for himself as well as George is? What do you think it comes down to?
Well, let's not forget that Lewis had the upper hand in Bahrain, and a very different circuit to Jeddah, with different requirements from the balance of the car. And we saw that Sergio Perez as well comprehensively outqualified Max Verstappen, unbelievably so, when I didn't see any problems from Max's lap in Jeddah, and Max was left scratching his head I think not quite as much as Lewis was, but there's a definite difference. And I touched on that earlier on in one of my answers, that different teams and different drivers are finding performance in this new dawn of Formula One, these new cars that we have. And I feel like fundamentally, these cars, because of the ground effects that they now have with the rear of the floor being sucked down onto the ground, has given the car in high speed much more stability on the rear generally, and that pushes on the front. It creates more understeer, a bit of more stability on the rear, especially to corner entry. I think drivers are more comfortable with that kind of feeling, maybe like Valtteri Bottas, who's a traditional kind of, we call it front limited driver. He tends to go better around circuits that are front limited, a bit more like Portimao, for example, in Portugal, or Sochi in Russia. You see Bottas's performances shine on tracks like that. Other circuits, say like Zandvoort, for example, where you need a much more pointy car. By that I mean where the car rotates around the front and the rear becomes unstable. Then you start to get into the realms of like Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen. Those kind of drivers demand a very strong front end of the car where the rear pivots around it, but it's unnerving. We've all been there as racing drivers, a very unnerving feeling when the rear is loose on entry and the front is very strong in the mid-corner. For me, that's more Max's and Lewis's style. And I think they're a bit not shocked by these cars, but they're missing that feeling in these cars. And they go hunting for it in qualifying, especially on a track like Jeddah. And I feel like maybe Perez, maybe George Russell as well, they're a bit more comfortable with the car being more stable at the rear and being a bit more lazy on the front end. Maybe that's just part of the problem for Max and Lewis when it comes to qualifying. And I think Lewis therefore went hunting for that same feeling in qualifying in Jeddah. And then when you get into when these cars start to actually lose the rear end, it's very violent. And I think that's what really unnerved Lewis in qualifying in Jeddah. And that's why he just couldn't carry the speed into those multiple medium speed corners. So sorry for the very technical explanation on that one, but that's how I'm kind of processing it. To answer your first question, what is coming up in the sim, I don't actually know. We'll find out when I get there, but I should imagine the quest continues as to how they can get the car to run where they want it to in terms of the ride height and what they can do in terms of balance. Like I've just been talking about, maybe there's a compromise that everybody has to live with to drive around in many ways, this kind of inherent feeling of excess stability on the rear of the car, and try to just drive around this understeer, or maybe make the car work around that, like embrace it almost. Live with the fact that the front isn't as strong as the rear anymore on entry to medium speed corners, and try and rework your style. So maybe I have to try and do that in the simulator as well, and maybe go down that kind of direction, explore that with setup to see if you can utilize that.
I presume, Ant, that you're going to be driving the new Australian track. Have you driven it before?
Well, I will be doing the race support, as they call it for them, at Australia. In Melbourne. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. Modification of the circuit, as we know, is a bit more open, so a bit more like Jeddah was, a bit more open high-speed corners now from what it was. Hopefully, again, it improves the racing, because that was, I think this will be the most critical test for these new F1 cars this year. You know, This is a proper case study to see if it actually works. But I'm convinced it will. These new cars are really delivering the promise